buddy. Morning. Good morning. How you doing, Representative Blunt? Huh? No, but I got one and I can share it with you. How's it going?
If I didn't tell you, yeah.
That's me too.
How you doing, my friend?
Morning.
We can share here.
Oh, I printed something out.
Okay.
It's like very,
I'm gonna be leaving if we
Not
go
super
past
important.
11. I gotta go to the airport pick up my daughter. She just came back from New York. So I went up there to see her cousin with my sister.
Now that we have a quorum, we will begin the Budget Review Subcommittee on General Government, Finance, Personnel, and Public Retirement. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Senator Mills, Senator Southworth, Senator Thomas, Senator West, Representative Bratcher,
Here.
Representative Donahue,
Yes, ma'am.
Representative Graham, Representative Hart, Representative Koenig, Representative Meredith, Representative Miles, Representative Pratt, Representative Raymond, Representative Tate, Representative Wheatley,
Here.
Senator McDaniel, Representative Petrie, Representative Reed, Representative Gooch, Representative Miller,
Here.
Representative Co-Chair Blanton,
Here.
Co-Chair Dossett, Chair Nemus.
Present. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes? We have first. Second. Any objections? Minutes have been approved. We'll start with Commonwealth Office of Technology, Mr. David Carter. If you introduce yourself for the record.
Good morning. I am David Carter. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer with the Commonwealth Office of Technology.
Please use your microphone.
There we go.
Perfect.
Again, I'm David Carter. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer with Commonwealth Office of Technology. And I'd like to thank the committee for giving me a few moments this morning to share with you about the security program within the Commonwealth Office of Technology that serves the executive branch of government. I'd like to start out quickly just looking at our approach and the foundation for our security program in the Commonwealth. We leverage two frameworks for that foundation. The National Institute of Standards and Technology Special Publication 853, also referred to as NIST 853, is a comprehensive risk management framework that is a governance framework that's used by most state governments and originally started as a federal and is a federal framework. But it's adopted by state governments for two reasons. One, it's a very comprehensive framework that gives us broad coverage across all of the controls that we need. It has 212 foundation controls. The Commonwealth aligns to the moderate baseline, which gives us a control framework of around 283 controls that we leverage in our program. We also use the MITRE ATT&CK framework, and that's less of a conventional framework, and that's more of a catalog of the techniques and processes that the bad actors use when they perpetrate their attacks. That gives us a comprehensive checklist of things that we can compare our security controls against to make sure that we have adequate coverage. To demonstrate our compliance with the NIST 853 framework, every other year we have a third party come in and do an independent assessment of our controls against the framework. They not only ensure that we have the controls in place, they do testing to ensure that we have effective controls in place and those controls are being executed. As this graph is actually from our executive summary of that, we show we have 264 controls that we are 100% compliant on. We had 9 low findings that are pretty much informational and 10 moderate findings that we've worked on since that report in 2020. We currently have a statement of work out for our 2022 report. This is the MITRE ATT&CK framework. The columns in this graph indicate the goals and objectives of a threat actor. Each one of those blocks underneath of those indicate a specific tactic that they can use to try to achieve that. An attack is a chain. It is a number of links. Each one of these boxes represent a potential link in that chain. If we can break that chain at any point, at any of those links, we stand a good chance of stopping the attack. As you can see, when we first picked this up in 2018, we didn't have a lot of coverage here. All of these red blocks are areas that we have opportunity. Since then, this is where we stand today. We have extensive coverage across nearly all areas of the MITRE ATT&CK framework. The items in green are those areas that we have coverage. The items in blue are those tactical initiatives that we plan to implement within the next 6 to 12 months. And the yellow are those that we are more strategic about, and they're going to take probably throughout our 2-year strategic plan. And I'll discuss more about the strategic plan at the end. We take a layered security approach. A lot of times when a technician like me starts talking about layered security, we start talking about individual technologies and the depth of our technologies. I prefer to look at it in more higher level. We have 4 layers that we focus on: employee, network, endpoint, which is your workstations and servers, and your data. Data is obviously the goal. The threat actors know we have really strong defenses in the network and the endpoint realm, as most enterprises do. So we're seeing the trend that they're focusing on our employees, and we're doing the same thing. We have a security awareness program, and we've partnered with the Department of Personnel, and they were tremendous partners in this, helping us get a awareness program in place that is part of our employee evaluation system that ensures that all employees have awareness training every year as part of their evaluations, and they also have it at onboarding, so when they come on to state government, they have the awareness training they need before they start using our systems. In addition to this formal training that we have that goes through the personnel cabinet and through my purpose, we also do other activities throughout the year, like in October is National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. We have presentations and do various activities during that month. Just to put some numbers around that, this last October we had 4 presentations. Out of those 4 presentations, we had 1,750 participants in those, which is really good numbers. We also do various activities that require interaction and set up mailboxes for those, and we received nearly 16,000 emails during that month, and that equates to about 20, well, whatever, sorry, a little slow on my math this morning, but that's a lot of instances where our employees thought about security that month. That was a great success, and we were really proud of that. We also fish our own people. Phishing, I'm sure you all have heard about it. You've probably seen it. If not, phishing is when a threat actor sends emails that are specially crafted to attempt to trick an employee to do something they want them to do, whether that's click on an infected attachment or click a link that they shouldn't, enter their credentials to try to steal their identity, things like that. So we fish our own employees to give them teaching moments. Those that click on those emails are directed to a page that lets them know that they've been phished and gives them an idea of what to look for. The phishing facts on this slide really kind of explain the importance of that. 93% of all attacks involve phishing at some point, usually early on in the attack chain. And depending on which source you go to, between 45 and 75% of all emails in motion at any given time on the internet are spam or malicious. Our vendor has provided us information that shows that, or their trends show that government organizations have an average click failure rate of around 11%. That means 11% of the people that receive a phishing email will click on it. Our failure rate for the last quarter was 3.28%. We're marked, well below the average, but when we started, we were above the average. So in approximately about a year and a half, we've had this program in place. It's been usually successful in bringing our numbers down. And where we sit right now, we're in the top 3% of all people globally that use our vendor solution. As we've helped our employees identify these and do the right thing and not click on them, we've also worked just as hard to keep them out of their hands. Now, this is a constant game of cat and mouse. They're constantly changing their tactics and trying to get around our defenses. This is a snapshot from our email defense system. The state, for the last 90 days, received 43.2 million emails. Out of those, 16.2 actually made it to user mailboxes. We blocked 62.5% of all email that came into state government. 18.6 million of that was just because they came from sources of bad reputation. They're known for phishing. They're known for malware. They're known for those bad things. 8.4 million were signature-based. That means we know they're bad. We've seen them, and we have signatures that say they're bad. The next two numbers are the ones that I think really talk about the strength of what the system provides. 112,000 emails made it through all of the other defenses, and the only reason we blocked it is because we were able to quarantine and detonate that package in a safe sandbox area and determine that it was doing bad things. We call that 0 day. You've never seen it before. There's no signatures for it, no real easy way to detect it other than to just see what it does and see how it behaves. And you're going to start seeing a theme of that as I go through this. And then 47,000 were blocked because of links, and the same methodology was applied there. The system followed the link and looked at what that link tried to do. So those are those behavior heuristical type defenses that we employ. Our network defense, obviously a network of our size produces a lot of information. for us to analyze. There can be tens of millions of events generated in a month. And then the incidents that's come from that can be in the tens of thousands. But we're really only concerned about the top 3% of those. A lot of that is noise. A lot of that stuff is taken care of by our proactive defenses that get in front of the threat, that keep them from posing a risk to our environment. So we need a system to help reduce that. Our security incident and event management system, we've replaced it last year with one that is much more effective. It gives us greater depth and detail of the data that we collect. We're able to collect logs from everything in our environment, from our workstations, our servers, all of our security architecture, our network infrastructure, our directory. We have a really holistic view of everything across our environment. That takes a bit of care and feeding. This slide kind of demonstrates that progression. When we first transitioned to the new security incident and event management system, as you can see on the left, we had 150,000, a little over 150,000 events generated. And then we began bringing in all of the infrastructure. And we had 788,000 events. That can quickly swamp our analysts. So the security incident and event management system applies that first line analysis, that first line triage of these events to eliminate the noise, to eliminate those things that we've already addressed through our proactive defenses, to bring it down to that top 3% that we really want to see, that is actionable, that our analysts can use to help reduce risk in our environment. These represent our endpoint defenses. This is the defenses that live on all of our servers and all of our workstations. On the left is our endpoint detect and response. And on the right is our malicious code protection. That's also referred to as antivirus, but modern technology is much more advanced than just antivirus. It protects against a lot of other things. The key points on this are all of the items on the left are behavior-based. They're not necessarily based on signatures. We don't have to know what a threat looks like in order to defend against it. We just have to know how it behaves. We look for things going on in the system that are anomalous, that are not normal day-to-day activity, and flag that as being out of the norm. And we can look at that and determine that it's malicious and block it proactively before it executes on the system. The highest peak on that graph on the left is execution. That's where a threat actor has attempted to execute code, whether that be somebody opened an attachment they shouldn't have or clicked on a link they shouldn't have, or there's malware executing on a system. We can stop it cold because our endpoint detect and response system detected it and can shut it down. On the right, 2/3 of this are standard antivirus. They detected it with signatures. We know what bad looks like, and we blocked it. The upper left and the left side of that circle represent heuristic detections. These are detections based on how something behaved on the system. There's a concept in IT called 0 day. 0 day is when nobody's ever seen it, nobody has a signature for it, and nobody can stop it unless they detect how it behaves. And that's why we've taken security in the Commonwealth in the direction of looking at how something behaves as opposed to just looking for bad things. We have to look for good things behaving badly. That's how the threat actors are working now. Now, as good as our program is, things happen, and you have to be prepared. So we have a really mature incident response program in place. Our plan is tested and validated, and it covers the entire life cycle of an incident, from the time that we detect that, to containment, to recovery, getting the system back on its feet, and then the most important step is the follow-up after that, to make sure that we learned from that incident to make it an opportunity for us to do better tomorrow than we did today. If an incident occurs, it occurred for a reason, and we have opportunity at that point to stop it. So many times things stop at that stage of, we're back up and running, let's get back to work. We need to go back and revisit that, find out how the chain of events that occurred, and work towards closing any gaps that may have occurred there to allow that to happen. Now, we're not going to sit static. The threat actors are not static, and we're not static either. So we have an ambitious strategic plan to continue to build on our success in our security program. We want to enhance our monitoring, and this is taking it down to the data level. We watch our network very closely. We watch our endpoints very closely. We watch our boundary to the internet very closely. We watch all of these things, and we want to start taking that a layer beneath that. We want to start looking at actual movement of the data within our environment. That can be a challenge because of the pervasive use of encryption. If you do a Google search, it sends you to a secure browser page that's secured end to end. Everything across the network now is encrypted. It's hard to get visibility on all of that data. So that's part of our strategic plan is to put creative ways in place to allow us to have that visibility. Data defense. We have petabytes of data in our environment. The data belongs to the agencies. The infrastructure belongs to us. There has to be a pairing between us and the agencies and the ability to catalog that data and know where the crown jewels live. There's a reason banks don't build bank vaults big enough to hold their office supplies, because vaults are expensive. You don't want to apply top-tier security to everything. So we have to catalog and categorize all of the data in our environment and have that holistic view of what we have in our possession so we can build the right walls and build the right protections around it. And then identity protection. We already have enterprise identity management for our internal identities that interfaces with our personnel system, that allows us to do things in very real time with our personnel actions. So we're really in good shape there. But this is focused on the citizens. Our vision is to have a citizen have a single identity when they come to the state. Right now, there's multiple ways that they can log into various systems, and we want to make sure that they have that cohesive experience. And that gives us one door to defend as opposed to having multiple doors to defend the way it is today. Risk management. We want to be able to catalog and have a holistic understanding of all risks in our environment. If you have a security guy that sits in front of you and says, we have no risk, you're 100% protected, you need a new security guy. We want to make sure that we have a full understanding of all risks in our environment and we're applying our spend and our defenses in the appropriate areas. Staff development. I want to make sure that I'm investing in my staff. As I said earlier, the threat actors are not static. My staff can't remain static. I have to make sure that they're trained on the latest technologies and they're trained on the latest security threats that are out there. This also has a benefit from a recruitment standpoint. State governments, and it's a national thing, not just Kentucky, it's the state government's pay scale has challenges competing with private sector that pay top dollar for the security resources that are available out there. So I can't afford to reach out and pay the six-figure salaries of the top-tier security folks out there, but I can build my own. And that has two benefits. One, we know how they were trained. We know how well they were trained. Two, I can build a workforce that has the same passion of the folks that I have in my staff today. I'm very blessed in that my staff have servant hearts. They find a lot of value in serving the citizens of the Commonwealth. And that's because they grew up in the environment. Their professional growth was in the environment of serving the Commonwealth and serving the citizens, and it means a lot to them. If I can build a workforce like that with new folks coming in, build their skill sets up, and have them have that same passion, there's a tremendous benefit from that. And then we want to do more with what we have. We've made great investments. As you can see in some of the previous slides, those have paid off well for us. We have really good coverage. But we've used 90% of the capabilities that we have simply because we are rebuilding. We are building from the ground up a really secure architecture. So there's still, maybe 10% of the capabilities available to us that we need to expand on. And we're going to make the investments to expand on that and squeeze every last dollar out of the investment that we've made. There is some additional opportunity with federal funding. With the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, it contained a provision for the state and local government cybersecurity grant program, which allocated funds to state and local governments. The state will receive 20% of the funding available, and the local governments through the state will receive 80%. For the state opportunity, we're going to focus on privileged access management. Those keys to the kingdom accounts, the accounts that have the highest level permissions. We already have a privileged account management system in place, but it is lacking. It does the basics, and we want to expand on that. We want to include things like multi-factor authentication and things that are going to strengthen our privileged access accounts. We also want to implement email fraud defense. We have strong defenses for email in our environment. We saw those slides earlier. We want to expand that to cover things outside of our environment. There are technologies in place that can allow us to sign messages for the Commonwealth. And if messages are sent that appear to be from the Commonwealth that are not signed by us, then email systems will reject them. That will keep somebody, a threat actor on the outside, from attempting to spoof and appear to be official communication. We've seen people attempt to redirect payment for contracts. We've seen people attempt to reach out to our citizens to steal their PII, posing as a state organization or a state entity. And putting these fraud defenses in place will help prevent that. We want to enhance our security monitoring. In our strategic plan, we're looking at the data. This, I'm looking at the depth, because we need to increase our spend in the amount of data that we retain. The amount of time that a threat actor lives in a technology environment before he's detected is typically 6 to 7 months. By that time, a lot of good, valuable forensic information has been overwritten or lost. So we want to increase the amount of data that we retain in our security systems to make sure that we can play that back and understand what happened 7 months ago when this threat actor actually landed in the environment, and know how he got in and know what he did every step along the way. And then lastly, our investment is going to be in our security architecture program. While we know what all of our security specific technologies that we bought can do and are going to make the most of those investments, vendors across IT have implemented security technologies within their own solutions that are not security centric. This program will allow us to pull all of those together and bring that into a really cohesive security approach, making the most of all IT purchases, not just those for security. And then on the local government opportunity, we're working with the Kentucky Office of Homeland Security as well as the Cybersecurity and Internet Security Agency, formerly a section of DHS, to establish a cyber grant committee that will allow us to work directly with our local government partners, give them some guidance, some education, some awareness of what they need. We have some counties that do extremely well, but we have smaller counties that don't, that rely on their local computer guy down the street to help them with their IT needs. And we want to give them the guidance they need to build sound proposals for this money. And then ultimately we will score those proposals and look at funding allocation that will probably follow 2 paths. One, which will be managed services that counties can consume, like managed security services, the monitoring and things that they need to let them know when things are going on in their environment. And local services, local resources for them, like the endpoint detection response capabilities that I talked about that the state uses, can be applied at a county level, purchasing things like that with this funding. So that, I know that was like drinking from a fire hose. That was a lot all at one time, but I certainly am open to any questions that you all might have.
Thank you for your succinct and down-to-earth presentation. Do we have any quick questions from any of the members?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, over here. Thank you for the presentation. I actually found it, very fascinating, and there are lots of little questions based on a lot of the things that you had shared with us. But I'm going to do some real general questions, if I may, Chair. When you said that we had an 11%, or the open rate is typically 11%. I think you mentioned for emails that are potentially not good, and our open rate is 3.2%, which sounds great. Can you define who our is?
The executive branch of government. We email all employees within the executive branch of government. What we do is we choose 4 specific templates that follow current trends that we see, and send those out in a random fashion to all email recipients in the executive branch. And then we track the special links within those emails and the attachments within those emails to know when they're open.
All right, great. And we could use some of that on the in the LRC, some training for us. And I don't know if your office works with here, because we also get these emails, and some do get through. So that would be interesting to see what our open rate is for legislators. I'm sure it's not going to be 3.2%. Also have a question related to the use of cell phones. I didn't hear anything other than computer use. So is this anything that your office does relate to cell phone usage?
Yes, sir. I had a limited amount of time, so I covered the tip of the iceberg. But we do employ Office 365, Microsoft Office 365. And the way that works is we're required to use the Microsoft suite of applications because of the way we manage data on those devices. First, we enforce policies on those devices to make sure that they're secure, to make sure that they're locked down. And then we also containerize any state data on those devices through the Microsoft Office 365 platform. So that's why you have to use Office applications to get to them, because Microsoft can wrap a wrapper around that data and control it. So if a device is lost, one, it is encrypted and protected by passcode. And two, we have the ability to wipe just that state data that is in those containers on those devices. That way we can apply those protections not only to the state-owned devices, but also personal devices.
Perfect. And one last question, Jared. Thank you. We hear in the private sector of some kind of insurance protection if the worst does happen and things are locked out. I imagine we have some kind of protections in that realm if something really, really bad happens.
Yes, sir. We have the Commonwealth Office of Technology has a cyber liability insurance policy. It provides $60 million in financial coverage, but the real benefit, the real strength from that policy is that it keeps people on retainer for legal representation, public relations, and technical response. Those are highly specialized skills, and they're not skills that you typically can afford to keep on a shelf until you need them. So having that in our pocket, having that ability to reach out and get a go team to hit the ground should an event occur of a decent scale, that's very valuable to have in our pocket. Now we're looking at possible alternatives to that, looking at paying the retainers directly, because the cost of that insurance is going up exponentially because of the level of risk in the insurance space. So we're seeing, we have seen a 200% increase in premiums. Other states have seen up to 500% increases in their premiums. It's getting bad out there, and we're looking at other states that have taken creative approaches to get the same sort of technical protections without the high cost premiums.
Senator West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the presentation over here.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Sorry, I get lost here.
That's all right.
Everybody sounds like they're coming from the same place.
I understand. I've been in that chair before. We're waiting, and I don't know if we have it back yet or not, a payroll study from the Personnel Cabinet, pending the second year increase in pay for state workers. And so what I think I hear you saying in your presentation, if we as a General Assembly were able to put in a different tier for COT, specifically as it pertains to, we'll say, high-level employees, people with specific knowledge and skill in cybersecurity, I'm assuming, would that be beneficial to the Cabinet to have that extra tier there?
Absolutely. I just had a conference through NASIO with my peers in other states. We had 35 states represented. Of those, there were 3 states that had specialized rates established for, like, security, the high-skilled workers, and it has been tremendously helpful for them as a recruitment tool, because it is challenging for us to compete. We have to compete with 6-figure salaries and the ability to 100% work remote, and that can be a challenge to try to match that with the benefits offered by state government and the salary scale. So having an additional tier would certainly be helpful.
Thank you.
Representative Miller.
Just a quick question, follow up to Representative Wheatley's question. Do you coordinate with your counterparts at LRC and in the branch?
We work with them when there's incidents that we feel like cross lines, but due to the separation of the branches of government, they have their IT infrastructure, we have ours, but we certainly are open to collaboration and work well with them when the need arises.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. It's very good. I was going to say, I think out of those 43 million emails, I got half of them, but you're just saying LRC is
I
separate
got the
from
other
yours.
half.
But LRC is separate from what you're doing?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, are y'all actively recruiting from the 4 universities? Now, many universities teach cyber in Kentucky, but 4 of them have the top line, the top tier, the military grade. Are you working with them on recruitment?
I am working I'm looking at establishing a program with them. I have been in communication with 2 of the universities, Louisville and
We'll
Eastern
talk
Kentucky.
offline because I think we can help you in the future with
Very
that.
good. Excellent.
What about, are you familiar with the Virginia shutdown a couple of years ago?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and their main thing, I talked with their IT man that went through that, and he said the biggest thing was backups.
Yes,
How
sir.
are we on that?
We're very fortunate in that we have our own alternate data center. So we have a secondary location for all of our data that synchronizes. Now, of course, if something happens here, it will synchronize that to the other location. But we have multiple layers of backups and multiple opportunities to recover. We have point-in-time backup systems that capture point-in-time. And then we also have snapshots that will allow us to go back in time and pull a snapshot back.
I was going to ask you if you have an outside cyber firm in case of major attack, and you kind of alluded to that with your insurance. So is that what you're?
Yes, sir.
Because if you don't have a company on retainer, then you're scrambling.
Yes, sir.
Especially if it's not just us that is affected, then you're in line with everybody else to try to get help. All right, in the extent of the breach, I was going to ask you about that. You know how many breaches, but you know the extent. I liked your sandbox because sometimes you want to follow what they're doing instead of just stop them.
Yes, sir.
Is that pretty much what you were saying with that?
Yes, sir. We have transitioned away from just typical, contain it, shut it down, rebuild it, go on. We've implemented a new approach called live forensics. We want to see what they're trying to do, what activities they're doing to try to achieve that. So putting them in an isolated environment, watching closely what they do, learning from what they do, help us apply that in our other defensive technologies so we can defend against it.
Right, because volume versus the damage is more important than your volume. Do you all, prosecution, we have the AG on next, do you all try to find who's doing this and prosecute?
I have a good partnership with our local FBI, and they're kind of the enforcement arm. They're the ones that want to take these actions because they typically cross state lines, if not country lines. So we work closely with them to get them any and all information that may be pertinent to an investigation and allow them to take the enforcement action.
Well, thank you very much, and I'd love to talk with you offline someday. So, okay. Yeah. And next we have the Office of the Attorney General. If you gentlemen will introduce yourself for the record and can proceed.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. I do not see our presentation queued up. Okay. Do I? Thank you. Now we're good to go. Good morning. My name is Blake Christopher. I'm the Deputy General Counsel for the Office of the Attorney General, and I'll let the gentleman to my right introduce themselves.
Good morning. My name is Matt Kokenauer, and I'm an Assistant Attorney General in the Office of Consumer Protection.
Good morning. And my name is Matt Hedden. I am the Special Victims Unit Director for the Division of Criminal Investigations.
And we're going to run through this presentation on a civil and then criminal side. Matt Kokenauer will start us off with the consumer protection aspect of what we're doing in cybersecurity in the AG's office.
Okay, so the first thing to note with data breach notices is that there are 2 different data breach notice statutes. So the first is KRS 365.732, and generally that statute is going to apply to private businesses. That statute provides a roadmap to private businesses who suffer a data breach on next steps, what to do next. Now, importantly for this presentation, that statute does not include notice to the Attorney General or other state agencies. So the data that we're going to go over today relates to the second data breach notice statute, which is KRS 61.933. And that statute applies to state agencies or third parties that contract with state agencies that maintain personal information. And so for those agencies or the third parties that contract with an agency, if they suffer a data breach based on this statute, they will provide notice to our office. And there's a form which is called the FAC 001, and that form is what's provided to our office along with a list of other state agencies. And so again, the statistics we have for you today are based on those KRS 61.933 data breach notices that are provided to our office. So since 2018, our office has received a total of 358 of those data breach notices. Now, and we've broken these down by year. I will point out that our office, so this administration started tracking this in 2020, January of 2020, shortly after we began. The subcommittee had asked for 4 years, so we went back and did find 2018 and 2019 source data, and we've added that, but the specific data that we had tracked was when our administration started in early 2020. What we have found of these total 358, the vast majority of data breach notices we receive are actually accidental breaches or inadvertent breaches. And a quick example, let's say an agency is emailing personal information. They're supposed to be emailing it to recipient 1. They accidentally email it to recipient 2. Now, that is a data breach, and that's going to fall under KRS 61.933. So our office is going to receive notice of that, and that agency is going to tell us what steps they're taking to correct that. However, that would not be a true intentional theft of personal information, a true cybersecurity attack that we think of in this context. So what the next slide shows, so the majority are not intentional. But what we've done with the next slide is taken a look at the numbers of those within the total, a subset of the numbers that are true intentional thefts of personal information. And so what you can see from this slide is that while the majority, of course, are inadvertent or accidental, from 2018 to at least 2021, the number of actual intentional cyber attacks is increasing. And of course, the number 5 is for 2022 to date. So, breaking it down even a little further into a more narrow subset of just ransomware attacks. So, from the data breach notices we've received under 61.933, the ransomware attacks are rare. We had 2 in 2020, 2 in 2021, 1 thus far in 2022. But what I'll note in the next slide is that the cost to an agency for a ransomware attack as opposed to a different data breach can be substantially different. So one of the things that the subcommittee had asked us to take a look at was the cost to agencies for these data breaches. And the form, the FAC 001 that is sent to us in the event of a data breach, it has a field or a form that allows the agency to add in the costs that they had based on this data breach. And again, noting that most of them are accidental or incidental, most agencies reported to us that they did not incur substantial cost based on the data breach. However, even in those accidental or inadvertent data breaches, the agencies noted that they did have to spend staff time to investigate the breach, to provide notice to the impacted individuals whose information was taken, to provide notice to our office as well as the other state agencies, and to to train staff on what happened and to update policies and procedures to try to ensure that what happened doesn't happen again. So that's most data breaches, and again, that's mostly accidental. So compare that with ransomware, where if you are an agency facing ransomware, you are likely going to have to, as was just discussed, hopefully you have a cyber insurance policy, but regardless, either you or through your cyber insurance policy, you're almost always going to have to hire a cybersecurity firm to come in and investigate forensically what's going on, what data has been locked, can it be unlocked. You're also typically going to have to hire a law firm to deal with the compliance issues with that. And so those two things alone would be substantially more cost than obviously an agency with the other type of data breach. The other thing that potentially could be a cost for that agency that we've seen rarely, but we have seen it, is if a breach does occur, an agency may choose in its response to provide free credit monitoring services to those impacted individuals. And so if you had a large ransomware attack and there were a ton of impacted individuals, it could be a substantial cost to pay for credit monitoring for all those individuals. So that's what agencies do through KRS 61.933. They investigate the breach, they notify the proper parties. So what does our office do? So our office, first of all, what we're doing is we are receiving those notices that we just discussed. We're tracking them, we're logging them, and then we are reviewing them to ensure that the agency is following the proper procedures based on the statute. In addition to that, we have a consumer education piece where on our website we have a section for identity theft, both for trying to reduce the likelihood that you become a victim of identity theft, and for those who have received one of these data breach notices. It kind of allows the consumer to know what their options are, and we provide resources for them. The third thing we do is independent of the data breaches from KRS 61.933. So if you're thinking about the first statute that we discussed, which would be a private business data breach, where they're going to give notice to the individual, but they're not required to give notice to our office or the other state agencies. So our Office of Consumer Protection, through the Kentucky Consumer Protection Act, we are investigating and we have entered into settlements based on those data breaches. So just because we're not receiving notice from those private companies doesn't mean we're powerless to act. And so since 2018, we've entered into 12 multi-state settlement agreements with private companies that are based on data security practices. And in total, with those 12 multi-state settlement agreements, we've recovered a little over $5 million, and we have instituted lots of injunctive relief to require those companies to update their practices, much like you just heard from COT. So that's all I have for consumer protection. I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Matt Hedden for the criminal.
Good morning. Just to give kind of a broad briefing about ransomware and what it is. Ransomware, as its name implies, is software that creates a condition where it ransoms a network away from the users. It's used in completely opportunistic attacks. It can be executed from hundreds or thousands of miles away. It requires little or no cost to initiate. The software essentially encrypts a system. Once that system's encrypted, it prevents the legitimate user from being able to do it. And again, those commands can be executed from other continents if they choose to do so. They don't have to monetize the data on the system. And that's important because historically, a hack, somebody would get into a system and they would offload the information and that data, and then they would use that to create fake credit cards or passports or some other type of way that they would then monetize that data. But with ransomware, that's not necessary. All the data is there still on the network. It's just encrypted and not accessible by the legitimate user. So in turn, the bad actors in the scenario would then require a form of payment, which is typically Bitcoin, or some other cryptocurrency in order to be given the decryption key so that the legitimate users would then again have access to their network. It can be deployed across numerous platforms, so not just the network servers. It could affect the individual laptops for a company or for a small business. It could infect cell phones particularly as well. It spreads primarily through clicking of malicious links or through gaining access to systems through weak passwords or unsecured remote desktop protocol. Just a word on the passwords. Sometimes human beings can get kind of lazy and they will use the same password for their work email as they would for their personal email. That personal email might become compromised, and then the bad actors would go out and look for, where does this person work? What access might I have to their email at their business? So that's a way that they may be able to manipulate that. This is just a quick diagram about the typical anatomy of a hack. This is what we've seen historically, where a bad actor would perform reconnaissance. In other words, sort of basically determine if the juice is worth the squeeze. Does that network have enough data and information on it that a user might be willing to pay some type of ransomware? Then comes the initial compromise. That goes back to clicking on a malicious link or some other access. Unfortunately, there are also instances where people inside the company may also create a condition because they're angry or they feel like they need some type of financial gain, and they could also execute those commands as well on their side. Once the bad actor has a foothold in the network, then they escalate their privileges, which gives them abilities to maybe change routing on vendors, etc. They get a larger hierarchy access to the system, and then they maintain their presence on that system, and they move throughout it to where they can find the most vulnerable and the most profitable sections. And again, this is typically what we see in a hack. Then they exfiltrate that data. And again, this is where a typical hack sort of strays away from ransomware. In this particular case, ransomware does not make that data go off the server. It stays on there. It just prevents the legitimate user from using it. The next slide this is a national criminal statistics, and you'll see that ransomware accounted for about 29 million. And then the next slide is related to Kentucky, and you'll see that for 21, ransomware accounted for 33 of the attacks, and that accounted for approximately $164,000 in loss to Kentuckians. And then the next slide sort of illustrates where these attacks are initiated from. They can literally be from anywhere in the world that has an internet connection, but these are some of the areas that we see primarily a lot of the bad actors manipulating systems from. Any questions?
Wow, you look like Representative Miller.
Just a quick question. Is spear phishing different from regular phishing?
Spear phishing is just a particular targeting of an individual email account. If you were the president or CEO of a company, I would probably want access to your email account versus the people in other portions of your company.
Senator Southworth.
So you mentioned inside jobs, and I think we were talking about private companies, but I'm familiar with like ransomware and stuff that's done by actors, let's say within the FBI, for example. So how does your office handle something like that when you've got ransomware being done by someone who you ordinarily may normally ask for help with investigation?
Well, one of the things about ransomware is that ransomware essentially is just encryption. It's just a program that encrypts a data source. You don't have to be particularly good with computer programming because that software is available. You can buy it on the dark web if you choose to do so, and just for a few dollars. The way we would handle it is what we've done in the past is we coordinate with United States Secret Service as well as the FBI's Internet Crime Center to investigate those.
just to follow up, so does the Internet Crime Center look into these things if there are actors in the FBI that were doing it, or does it come from the Internet Crime Center that can do this?
They do, and I apologize. So the local field office would initiate the investigation for something here in Kentucky. They would then relay that information that they collected to the IC3, and they're the clearinghouse of larger threats. So they could look at it and see a profile that might apply to, this is something we've seen with this particular version of ransomware. So then they would be coordinating with the local field offices here in Kentucky.
Okay, thank you.
So when a company pays a hacker for shutting down their system, they have to hope that the bad guy is honest.
That's absolutely correct. And I kind of use the analogy, if you give a mouse a cookie, he's going to want a glass of milk. So just because you paid him $100,000 to decrypt your system does not mean that he's going to do it.
Well, you might use glue strips. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much. And next we have Chamber of Commerce.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. I'm Kate Shanks, Senior Vice President of Public Affairs for the Kentucky Chamber. And I'll let my colleague who's online introduce himself, so that way I think we can check his sound.
Hi, good morning, committee. My name is Brian Cobb, and I am the Chief Information Officer for C Forward, Inc. We are a managed service provider serving Northern Kentucky, Cincinnati, Lexington, and Louisville.
Great, thank you. And Chairman, thank you so much for having us here to talk about this issue today. Great presentations before us, so I think you got some good general information. This is absolutely something that's impacting businesses big time. The trends are going in the wrong direction in terms of attacks and in terms of the cost of preventing attacks, as well as the cost of dealing with an attack if you have to face that. And so it is certainly something we're concerned about in terms of the cost of doing business. Most of the breaches are external attacks, but there are, of course, internal ones that happen as well, as we just heard. Most of the attackers are motivated by money. There could be other reasons here and there, but the vast majority, it's money. And these are some of the hardest hit industries. And, you see government in there, you see healthcare in there. That's pretty common when you think about personally identifiable information. But one of the things that we're seeing with ransomware, you don't have to have that kind of information anymore. And so it's changing a little bit who is under attack. And then, of course, small businesses are not immune. In fact, they are often targeted. And this is for very specific reasons that Brian will talk about. And Representative Pratt, we work with you and your committee on these issues. We're very concerned about it. I was looking at some research that was reported on by Forbes recently, a survey that was done that found that small businesses with less than 100 employees were 3 times more likely to be targeted by social engineering attacks where you're using a person to gain access. So this is not something that's just hitting the big guys at all. A couple of the numbers I'll just run through, and this was done by a survey by the U.S. Telecom, the Broadband Association for Small and Mid-Sized Critical Infrastructure Businesses. And there's lots of different ways you can split and divide this data to kind of get a sense of how big this problem is. But for this particular one, we're honing in on those small and mid-sized. They did a survey. 75% said that they had been had at least one breach in company history. Average cost, $170,000 in 7.5 months to resolve it. Doing lots of things in response to those attacks. And industry experts are recommending that you dedicate 10 to 15% of your IT budget towards cybersecurity or cyber hygiene, as we'll sometimes call it. But we're actually seeing businesses spending even more than that from their IT budget. You can see in that graph on the right, those 50 to 100 and 100 to 500 employee businesses are spending the most, according to the survey that they did, of their IT budget on cybersecurity. And these are some of the common actions that are being taken by businesses. And I can tell you at the Chamber, just my personal experience, from when I started a few years ago, we do so much more than we did back then. And it's not that we just know more, it's just the risks have gone up. There's so many more attacks. Small businesses and small organizations are getting attacked. We use the multi-factor authentication. So if I access the remote server, I have to use an app on my phone to literally click, yes, it's me. It sends me a message, are you trying to access? And I click, yes, it's me, and it lets me in. It's a very simple process, but if something happens with my phone, I'm a little stuck. So it's something that businesses are having to think about. Policies and procedures. I was emailing back and forth with an employee recently about a list. We were creating a list. All of a sudden, a fake Kate appeared, sent him an email with an Excel spreadsheet that you use to create lists. He clicked on it and it caused problems. And so we now have a message that says this originated outside of your organization if the email doesn't come from the real Kate Shanks. We see so many fake emails from Ashley Watts, our president and CEO, and they're kind of silly because they're usually full of errors and they just don't sound like anything she'd ever say. But there are some that come through where you really have to scratch your head and be like, well, this is an Excel sheet my boss wants me to work on. And then all of a sudden you get into trouble. Department of Homeland Security, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. So there is this federal body that's working on this. And then we're seeing, of course, businesses spending more and more, whether they're spending on mitigating and these practices that they're putting in place, liability insurance that we've talked about a little bit, or they're spending on cleaning up the mess when they do get an attack. And then I can't miss an opportunity to complain about COVID because it had such a significant impact on workplaces. You know, think of all the people going to work from home during COVID in 2020, and it was about getting people up and running quickly. Were some security measures skipped, and did that create an increase that we're seeing in some of the attacks? The PPP, the UI fraud, we have testified on the UI fraud. These criminals are opportunistic. And so when you had all this government programming and government money, which we needed at the time, flowing to individuals and to businesses, it made them ripe for attacks. And then, as we've already heard today, people are the weakest link. Most of these attacks are coming through people. About 82% are coming in through people. And then COVID made us weaker. If you're working from home and you get a suspicious email, perhaps you'd be like, oh, that person's 2 doors down. I'm going to go ask her why she sent me that. Well, now you got to pick up the phone, send a message. These are things businesses have to think through as you have a workforce that's more and more remote. And then ransomware, which was explained really well just now, this is where we are right now. These attacks are through the roof. And as was pointed out, you don't have to be somebody that has personally identifiable information. You don't have to be a bank or a healthcare or government. You can be an engineering firm, a small engineering firm that works with highway contractors or that builds schools, but you've got data that's important and you could be vulnerable to these ransomware attacks because your data is important. And we're also seeing more manufacturers because if you think about advanced manufacturing and you think maybe you have equipment or systems connected to the internet, all of a sudden that ransomware, you don't have people's credit cards, you don't have their social security, but they're taking down a piece of equipment that you need to operate to serve your customers. So that's where we're seeing this situation kind of evolve and become very difficult. And then additionally, the insurance market, which has been mentioned, it's very much a young market compared to some of the other property and casualty coverages that you'll see. It's evolving with the risk, and the loss cost these last few years has been very high, has been increasing because of the risk. And so you're seeing sort of this balancing out and these changes in costs because of that. But I do want to throw it over to my colleague, Brian, to provide some additional detail. And he is an expert in this field and can add some specifics to this as well.
Yeah, thank you, Kate. I think the slide that's up right now that you're looking at pretty much shows what we're seeing as a trend, not only in Kentucky, but across the globe. And you've heard about it already. Ransomware attacks are just on the rise. And I'll talk a little bit about why I think that's happening, which Mr. Hedden already alluded to earlier. On the next slide, you'll see 2 graphs here that I think show a point that Kate brought up. The size of businesses that are being impacted by ransomware are typically in the 10 to 1,000 range. Those are the businesses that can't afford to protect themselves the way larger businesses can. They're also, if I'm an attacker and I attacked a major corporation and make the news, that's going to be bad because I'm going to be a major target for law enforcement. But if I hit a mid-sized business, now I fly under the radar. I'm still generating income, and without a lot of the risk. In fact, there was an affiliate from one of the ransomware gangs that somebody actually had an opportunity to interview, and he alluded to the fact that if I can hit one major business and score really well and really big, but then I'm a huge target, and it creates a geopolitical firestorm, and that's when they kind of run and hide. So it's better to hit those mid-sized businesses. And then the graph on the right is just a ransom payments by quarter. And you can see back in 2018, ransom payments were relatively small as criminals determined that this was very successful. And that the fact that Kate alluded to earlier about businesses, all you need is a business who cares about their data. You have to have data to operate your business. You have to have financials. You have to have working documents. If you don't have that, you can't operate. So that's why any business, it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter how big you are, if you think that your data is important, you're willing to pay for it to get it back. So I've been in the trenches for the past at least 8 years. I think my first ransomware case that I was involved in was back in 2017. The ransom demand was $8,000. That was a relatively small organization, under 20 employees. The last 2 ransomware cases I was involved in involved businesses in the 40 to 50 employee range. The ransom demands were between $400,000 and $500,000. So those are major costs for a small business. Next slide. So you've heard a lot about ransomware. This is what keeps small to medium-sized business owners up at night. It's ransomware. We've heard about what it does. We've heard a little bit about the double and triple extortion, but let me kind of reiterate what the double extortion is with ransomware. So as Mr. Hedden said, bad actors are going to get in and they're going to encrypt the data on the network, and that pretty much takes the ability of the company to operate away. So they're kind of dead in the water. But before they encrypt that data, they're gonna steal all the data and they're gonna pull it all off, and most businesses now can recover from a ransomware attack just by using backups. As Mr. Carter said from COT, they've got good backups, they can recover. But if I steal your data first and you don't pay, I'm gonna extort you and tell you, if you don't pay, I'm going to release your data to the public. Now you're dealing with a data breach, which is very expensive. I talked a little bit earlier about the rise in ransomware. Mr. Hedden touched on this earlier, but it's all about ransomware as a service. You don't have to have technical expertise to pull off a ransomware attack anymore. You can simply buy ransomware on the dark web. If you have issues pulling off your ransomware attack, no worries. You can just buy their 24/7 customer support, and they will help you pull off the attack right along with you. So that's kind of what we're dealing with. And as I said earlier, if you think you're not a target, you're wrong, because it doesn't matter who you are or where you are. One thing that was lightly touched on earlier was business email compromise, and I did want to touch on that. That's when a bad actor will gain access to someone's email. From then, they're gonna look through the sent items. They're gonna look through all the email that's in this mailbox, and they're gonna hope that you're corresponding with somebody else's accounts payable or accounts receivable. And then they're gonna reply to one of those emails, and they're gonna say, "Hey, great talking to you last week, but we just changed our bank, and we're gonna we need you to change your ACH to redirect payments to another bank." We've had probably 4 of our own customers fall for the scam and literally wire tens of thousands of dollars to the bad actors. This was talked about a little bit earlier as well. Most criminal activity is overseas. It's just really difficult to find them because they're operating on the dark web, and it's even more difficult to prosecute them. This is a statistic from the FBI Criminal Crime Complaint Center, but from 2014 to 2019, business losses jumped from 60 million to 1.8 billion. And that number is a lot higher now. So the other thing I wanted to bring up, because this is something that we deal with almost on a daily basis at this point, is assisting our customers with their cyber liability insurance applications. The effect of all this ransomware and that rise of ransomware and business email compromise, the insurance industry is taking a major hit through no fault of their own. Cyber loss ratios soared from 47% in 2019 to 73% in 2020. So that is exactly why we're seeing cyber liability insurance premiums double, triple, quadruple. I think you heard numbers earlier, 2, 3, 4, 500% increases. That is exactly what we're seeing with all of our small to medium-sized business customers. They will either not insure you at all if you don't meet certain criteria, or they will take coverage down. So they will, a $5 million policy might now be a $1 million policy. And oh, by the way, we're also going to increase your premiums a modest amount. So the coverage that you're getting is less, and you have to pay the same or more for it. So what insurers are doing is they're demanding these high cost, disruptive, but in my opinion, necessary solutions to even cover small businesses. So as Kate said earlier, it's multi-factor authentication across the entire organization. It's having policies and procedures in place. There's cyber liability insurance questionnaires that I've seen 50 questions long and 5 pages. So they're very in depth. But this is something that businesses should already be doing, a lot of it. So I think what we're seeing, this shift in the market, is becoming very costly to small businesses. It's not only the cyber liability insurance premiums that are going up, it's the solutions that you have to implement, the cost of those solutions. It's also the cost to the business after implementing the solutions. As Kate alluded to earlier, if her multi-factor authentication doesn't work, if it quits working, she might be completely locked out and can't do her job. Okay, so that's what we're seeing. That's kind of what we're seeing across the small and medium-sized business market.
Thank you, Brian. And I'll just have a couple thoughts to end on. Can't get up here and not talk about workforce for the chamber. Y'all have heard us complaining about workforce challenges now for a couple years, really longer. The talent pipeline for cybersecurity workforce is huge. It's something to think about. There's a lot of problems I think you heard today that you as a legislative body may not be able to tackle. There's not a legislative solution for everything that we talk about. But you just think about the talent pipeline. There's this website out there called cyberseek.org that tracks the industry. And there's about 1 million people across the United States that are working in the field of cybersecurity. Another 700,000 jobs open, and about 150,000 in just the Southeast. So this is a field that is growing, and it's not just about training people to deal with the things that Brian talked about, but what the next big threat is that we haven't even seen. So this is an area where I think we can continue to talk about making sure we're building out that pipeline, not just for Kentucky and the region, but the nation as a whole. Some states have looked at cybersecurity safe harbor statutes, where you put in statute maybe standards that some industries are already doing. You're defining things like what a quick enough response is, and then if businesses choose to adopt those standards, or perhaps they're already doing it, they have access to the affirmative defense if they against the liability if there's a lawsuit that comes. And so when we talked a lot about the cost to business, we didn't talk about if you get sued after this happens to you. You can do everything right and still be a target. Sometimes it's what you don't do, and we are often concerned about any sort of patchwork of regulations across the state. We think a lot of these issues need to be dealt with at the national level, and making sure that we're bringing businesses to the table to develop broad consensus, relying on public-private partnerships, because at the end of the day, innovation is key. Just hearing from COT about how they're trying to study these criminals and how they're getting in so that we can learn how to safeguard ourselves, I think is important. And to the extent that we have criminals in our own backyard doing this stuff, making sure that we have support for law enforcement of criminals, I think is key. You know, obviously people in other countries attacking us is one thing, but to the extent that there's stuff happening here, we need to make sure we're prosecuting those criminals to the full extent. So with that, Chairman, I'll happily open it up for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Shanks, and we'll start with Representative Miller.
Kate, good presentation. Do you know if our public universities, any of our public universities, have majors offered in cybersecurity?
I think there are some, Chair, that you mentioned Ford earlier. Maybe?
Yes, there's a multitude that have cyber, but there's 4 that has to have the top line. And you'll hear this at the 1 o'clock A&R meeting. We're having University of Louisville presentation that's going to go over this.
Thank you.
I pointed that statistic out to my son recently, like, oh, this might be something.
Yeah, I'm trying to get my grandson into it.
He ignored me, but
He's
14 now.
But you're right. You'll hear that this afternoon. 750,000 jobs now.
Yeah.
And these are top line 6 figures right out of.
Yes.
Representative Graham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When you talk about these criminals and what they're doing to businesses, are most of them coming from outside of the United States, or are they internal?
It's my understanding, and
Or
Brian,
both.
feel free. I think the majority are outside the United States.
Yeah, that's correct. The majority of these attacks are originating from outside the United States.
Yeah, which makes it all the more complicated.
Well, let me ask you this to further it down. Where are most of these coming from? Is there a tracking areas that says that it's in Europe, or coming from Asia, or coming from Africa, or coming from South America? Is there an area of the world that is much more into this and successful at it?
Brian, I know you have some countries you can.
Yeah, I think what I've seen mentioned is mainly Eastern European countries, Middle Eastern countries, Russia, China, North Korea. Your typical your typical countries that you would expect to be pulling off a lot of these attacks. But that doesn't mean they don't happen from other areas around the world as well.
Senator Southworth.
I just want to follow up on that. So if you're a hacker from the United States and you're using multiple VPNs from the obvious people, are we talking about data as far as where the last point was that came in here, so it looks like it's from Iran, or are we talking about tracking VPNs to their original source because we're really tracking that much information somehow? I mean, because it seems like to me the obvious way that people do things from inside is make it look like it's from outside.
That's a good question. Brian, any thoughts on that? And she's talking about people routing through other countries.
Yeah, no, she's correct. But all of the data that we're seeing is based on the actual originating source. It is definitely not the end source through multiple VPNs. It's the originating source. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you for your presentation, and I'd like to end with a little bit of warning for individuals. If you have someone that's close to you, family, friend, or whatever, they can somehow get into your email by knowing you. You forgot your password, and they know your answers, and then they go into your 401k, and then they say, well, send the instead of a text to the email, and they change your codes or your passwords and stuff. And how they get your password is, first of all, they say, if you forget your password, there's simple questions. What's your mother's maiden name? Well, they know that. So what you ought to do is give some phony maiden name, so even your personal people close to you don't know how to get in your stuff. Now, we were talking about the cyber workforce and the pipeline. You know, I'm very interested in the workforce in Kentucky. Well, you're going to hear about a Kentucky Regional Center. We're going to try to start here in Kentucky at 1 o'clock in the A&R if anyone's interested. So with that, if there's nothing else, we are adjourned.